enforcement and accountability in public administration. I now call on Deputy Richard O'Donoghue to move the motion. Deputy, you have 20 minutes combined between the speakers.
Thank you, Chair, and I move the motion in the names of Independent Ireland and its sponsors. I'm not going to soften this. We have a national disgrace in our hands. Ireland claims to protect whistleblowers, but what we actually do is destroy them. You know it, I know it, and the public knows it. We bring in laws, we pat ourselves on the back, and then the state turns around and crushes the very people who try to protect us. And today I'm saying not anymore. Not on our watch. Not under legislation endorsed by this House, whistleblowers are being punished for doing the right thing. We're supposed to be the ones defending these people. But look what actually happens in this country. They speak up, they report wrongdoings, they act in the public's interest. And the state responds with the 3 Ds. And this was reported by the Irish Times, and they called it out. Delay, deny, destroy. This is across all civil service, and today I have a list of names of whistleblowers. So we have Maurice McCabe, who is in the gallery. An Garda Síochána. Noel McGee, Irish Prison Service. Von O'Rourke, Defence Forces. John Barrett, An Garda Síochána, and Cian Kennelly, Toole. And many more from local authorities across this country. Today we're not here to punish people in the civil service that are doing the right thing. There is many people within all those agencies in civil service, An Garda Síochána, that do brilliant work. But there is also always a small few that use their position to outside of their remits of their work, and they expect then their departments then to cover them when it comes to law. This is where we've got to stop it. And I'm going to read out one of these cases. Has already gone through the courts, has already been finished, so I must just read out one of the cases to you. Excuse me now 1 second. Apologies. Sorry, now I picked up the wrong page. I rise today to address a matter of public concern: the misuse of public powers by officials acting outside of their lawful remit, and the misuse of taxpayers' money to shield such behaviour. I want to bring to the attention of the House a case involving Meath County Council, where significant procedural failures have been highlighted to me. I have also received confirmation other state authorities and genuine concerns, including important health and safety issues, were raised and ignored. Instead of addressing those concerns, public funds are now being used to silence the whistleblowers who correctly identified both the procedural failures and their associated risks, such as using public funds to place criminal records on innocent individuals who are highlighting the wrongs. These failures occurred in the authorisation and oversight of a waste facility beside an airfield in County Meath, where proper procedures were not followed and warnings from the state bodies, professionals and the airfield owner were disregarded. The consequences were devastating for a very unique and well-established property and family business, with a long-standing legacy, were effectively destroyed. The situation escalated further when the Council pursued criminal convictions against the innocent member of the family without defence or support of allegations. For abuse clarity, nothing in what I am proposing would weaken the public right to a legal action against the local authority. In court case 2023-00288, the presiding judge stated, now this is coming from the judge, that Meath County Council did not deal with the matters appropriately, that she could not answer positively regarding the submission, and that the individual had been treated very badly for a very long period. Such remarks from a bench are rare, and they point out the serious breakdown in proper administration standards. This raises a fundamental issue. Civil servants are protected when they act within the scope of their lawful authority. Now, this is where it's going to become very important for people to watch this, and for civil servants to watch this as well. And I'm going to read this to you again, just to make sure that all civil servants understand law. It outdates any constitutions or acts. This is law. Law of the land is what they've got to work for. Civil servants are protected when they act within the scope of their lawful authority. But when officials go beyond the remit, misapplying, construing, or effectively manufacturing legislation or obligations that do not exist, and refusing to provide legal basis for their actions when asked, they are no longer acting for the state. This is the most important thing. So they're knowingly making legislation themselves, but they're not acting within the lawful of the work of that they're permitted to do. They are acting as individuals, and they should be held individually accountable. Taxpayers should not be footing the bill to defend ultra-virus conduct. Public funds must never be used to shred wrongdoing or to encourage behaviour that undermines confidence in our instruments. If we continue to identify officials knowingly act outside the law or fail to carry out their duties properly and fairly, when incentivise future abuse of authorities and destroys innocent families and businesses and communities. For absolute clarity, nothing in what I am proposing would weaken the public right to take legal action against the local authority. People must always retain the fundamental right. These reforms simply end an automatic use of taxpayers' money to defend officials who knowingly exceed misuses of their lawful powers. Therefore, I am calling for a review of the statutory protections afforded to civil servants, a clear mechanism for professional accountability when officials act outside their remit, and end the using of public funds to defend ultra-virus actions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Cathy. Minister, last June I said something that many people across this country already knew. Whistleblowers in Ireland are not protected. In fact, they are destroyed. The Taoiseach stood up in this very House and told the House our laws are among the best in Europe. He said the government values these people. Well, Minister, since then I have sat with countless, well over 50 whistleblowers from every corner of public service, from civil servants to local authority staff, nurses, defence force personnel, people in universities, people representing nursing homes and state agencies. And their experience is simple. They do not feel protected. They do not feel, but what they do feel is punished. They feel threatened. They feel isolated. And they feel abandoned by the state that they went out to protect and tried to defend to the best of their ability. So why is the reality, Minister, so different to the government's press release? Because the key protections are ignored in this laws. Basic rights are denied to the whistleblower. Access to records are blocked to the whistleblower. And full financial strength of this state is used to grind those people right into the ground. Every member of this House knows the truth. A law is only as strong as those who implement it. Let me give an example, and I welcome Sergeant Maurice McCabe and Mr. John Barrett to the public gallery with others. Both of them have stood up for honesty, for integrity, and in the duty of public service. And both have paid an enormous personal price for standing up and doing the right thing. In the case of Mr. John Barrett, one of the most shocking that I have ever come across in my life, in my public life, or ever even read about. In September 2024, he received a letter perpetrating him to be sacked as a senior civil servant from the Minister of Justice. Now bear in mind that the Minister of Justice had no legal authority to do so. Only the government can dismiss someone at that senior level of the civil service. The Minister acted alone. Her actions were not legal and were not constitutional in any basis whatsoever. Worse still, the dismissal relied purely on a disciplinary investigation at the Garda Commissioner, who had no power whatsoever to initiate. The process was tainted from the very start, Minister. It was not independently ran, it was not fair, and the crucial documents providing John Barrett's innocence were deliberately withheld for years. The most extraordinary fact, and the absolutely amazing fact that I find about this entire case, is there was never one, not one complaint against that man. Not one complaint was ever put in writing. Not one allegation. Everything was fabricated about that man. Letters from 2018 provided, those letters were provided afterwards, were hidden from the Minister, were hidden from the courts, and it resulted in millions of euros being spent, millions of taxpayers' euros, Minister, being spent defending a false witness against that man. That was not a mistake. That was a strategy, and that was aimed clearly to destroy that man and to send a message to every whistleblower across this state. And it was keep your head down and don't speak out. And do not put your head above the parapet when you're taking us on and when you're telling the truth about us. Across the system, I've witnessed the similar patterns from those that I've met, Minister, the 50 plus that I've met. I call it the hidden playbook. It's delay, deflect, deny. Quarterly updates are ignored. Disclosures are not investigated. Records are withheld. People are targeted. And when the whistleblower goes and he asks for help or she asks for help, it's often sent straight back to the person that they're making the complaint about or who has perpetrated the wrongdoing. Meanwhile, this state uses its vast financial resources to power itself and spends endless resources in legal fees, and all to do what? To destroy the whistleblower, while a whistleblower cannot do the same. That imbalance, Minister, tells a story of its own. And I say to each member of this House, none of us here, we need to reflect on the values of this House and what this House truly stands for, and what the EU law stands for and how it is implemented. And we need to reflect that honestly inside in this chamber and this House. In a system designed to silence people, not to protect people of this republic. Chairman, or Cian, this cannot continue. This House has a duty to change it. We in Independent Ireland intend to bring forward legislation in the coming months to level the playing field, enforce accountability of those who misuse their powers, and deliver real protection for those who speak up. And before I conclude, Cian, before closing, I want to acknowledge the courage of the people in the gallery today. Mr. Kieran Keneally of Toole, health whistleblowers Shane Corr, Peter Behan and Margot Hannon, Yvonne O'Rourke of the Women of Honour, George McLaughlin of the Department of Enterprise, Noel McCree of the Irish Prison Services. Noel McCree is a man who lost everything, who lost his home because of standing up and speaking out. And why? Why did he do it? Because he reported millions of euros being stolen. Millions of euros in theft of state property. And what was his reward for that? He lost his home and he lost his livelihood. And he's here in the gallery today. And I salute you, Noel, and I feel so sorry for you of what you were after going through in this scenario. Their stories are very different, but the pattern is continuously the same. Delay, deflect, deny, punish and exhaust the whistleblower. And if the message is always the same in the civil service and other bodies, keep your head down, say nothing, and let the system carry on as it is. But these people refuse to do that. They put the truth first. They put their country first. They put Ireland first, and Ireland is better because of them. I want to say, before I conclude, I mentioned Cian Keneally, a man who brought the whistleblowers to my attention first day, a man who has been destroyed by this state, a man who was financially bereft by this state. There's whistleblowers in this audience. There's whistleblowers in this audience who will tell you, Minister, of what the state did to them, and each individual organisation. There is a playbook. There is a playbook at hand here. Thank you.
Firstly, I want to welcome the members in the gallery today, the courageous individuals who stood up. Maurice McCabe and John McGuinness and Cian Keneally. These people have done, and many others, the women of honour as well, have done a tremendous service to the state and showed incredible courage and conviction. And in every case, the state essentially used every lever in their power to smear these individuals. And I rise today with a heavy heart and a sense of responsibility. What we are addressing here is not a technical matter. It is an indictment on the state and on the very people who stood up in protecting the state. I want to highlight the horrific experience of the members of the Defence Forces, the Justice Alliance and the Women of Honour Minister. This case is a systematic failure embedded over many years by silence, made possible by the state that looked after itself before justice. The Defence Forces Justice Alliance submitted over 50 protected disclosures. These disclosures included reports of bullying, harassment, abuse, sexual assault, institutional wrongdoing. Many of these disclosures related to the Minister and senior officials within the department. The protected disclosure were sent to the very department and the very senior figures that were implicated in the allegations. The playbook is at hand here again, Minister. And it was closed at a preliminary stage. And we know of these members, the wrongdoing did not stop. It continued. People who had served with honour and courage were left discouraged, silenced, and in many cases traumatised over and over again. They became convinced that the protected disclosure legislation was not fit for purpose. And there were many more examples, Minister. And it is clear that there was a very clear message right across the Defence Forces. They saw what happened to those who spoke up. And because we saw what happened to those that spoke up, many others stayed silent. I want to raise the devastating case of Cian Keneally, a man with great courage who stood up and highlighted issues in terms of financial irregularity in relation to Toole in Cork. In 2019, he made a protected disclosure about gross mismanagement, bullying and potential irregularities in the Toole office in Cork. And instead of being protected, instead of the case being investigated and highlighted, he was left without pay, unable to access social welfare because Toole essentially struck him off but gave him 0 pay slips and refused to actually engage with him, refused to actually accept his resignation letter because it highlighted problems and difficulties within Toole. But what followed was worse. Internal records released only after the WRC settlement showed that Toole staff had contacted his private therapist without consent, conducted unauthorised background checks on him, and even falsely suggested he posed a danger to vulnerable children. This is what happens to whistleblowers in this country. A smear campaign, Minister. An internal investigation dismissed his original concerns, yet a former staff member has since confirmed that financial oversight issues did exist in Toole at that time, and also found derogatory language was used against him. And a separate internal investigation did take place. 2 weeks ago, he filed a second protected disclosure detailing concealed data, retaliatory actions, and also corroborated evidence as well, Minister. After 7 years, the damage to him, professionally, personally, and emotionally, is profound. This is a failure of a state agency to uphold the very principles it claims to protect: fairness, due process, and so on. The safety for those who speak up in the public interest. This cannot happen, Minister. We must stand up. We must protect individuals who stand up in the interest of the state.
Thank you, Lawless. Minister, I invite you to move the government's amendment.
I welcome the debate on the protected disclosures legislation in Ireland this month. Yes, well, I will be at the end. Yes, because I want to make it clear that the government have an issue with this, but I'll get to that and I'll make my speech. So on behalf of Minister Jack Chambers, I want to thank most sincerely Deputy Richard O'Donoghue and the Independent Technical Group for bringing this very important matter before the Dáil, and to also acknowledge the presence of the people in the chamber. The Protected Disclosures Act of 2014 is Ireland's national whistleblower protection law. This legislation was designed to protect workers from penalisation for speaking up about wrongdoing in the workplace. Persons who make protected disclosures, often referred to as whistleblowers, should not be treated unfairly or lose their jobs or face legal proceedings because they have made a protected disclosure. On foot of the EU Whistleblowers Directive of 37 to 2019, the Act was expanded and enhanced by the Protected Disclosures Amendment Act of 2022, which was signed into law on the 21st of July of 2022. The Protected Disclosures legislation provides comprehensive protection for whistleblowers from penalisation or threats of penalisation. These protection covers unfair dismissal, unfair treatment such as suspensions, demotions, loss of pay, change of working hours, reassignment, disciplinary actions, etc., and coercion, intimidation and harassment. Statutory protection from penalisation is provided mainly by the Workplace Relations Commission, who can make orders for restitution and payments of up to 5 years' salary and compensation. Whistleblowers can appeal decisions of the WRC to the Labour Court, and workers also have recourse to sue for damages in court. As well as these protections, the Act also provides for criminal penalties for penalising a reporting person, taking vexatious legal proceedings against a worker reporting person, or disclosing the identity of a reporting person. I note that the Independent Technical Group has not introduced a draft bill or head of bills, which have simply put forward a number of broad proposals for amendment of the Protected Disclosures Act of 2014. I would like to go through some of these proposals and our reasons for opposing them. Technical flaws. Some of the proposed provisions are conceptually and technically flawed, as they call for the introduction of sanctions and protections and the establishment of statutory duties that are already enshrined in the Protected Disclosures Act of 2014. For example, the Independent Technical Group proposed the introduction of personal accountability provisions, making it an offence for any officer or employee of the state to obstruct or delay an investigation, destroy or alter documents, or knowingly provide false information. However, these kinds of provision are very clearly set out in Section 14A of the Act. Section 14A makes it an offence for any person to hinder or attempt to hinder a worker in making a report, penalise or threaten to penalise a reporting person, bring vexatious proceedings against a reporting person, breach the confidentiality of a reporting person, provide false information, or fail to comply with the requirement in Section 6.3 to establish, maintain and operate internal reporting channels and procedures referred to in the said Action 6.3. The Group's proposal to amend the Protected Disclosures Act to prohibit the use of non-disclosure agreements does not take account of the fact that Section 15 of the Act already states that workers are immune from civil legal action by an employer, for example, for a breach of confidentiality clauses in their contract of employment, and that Section 23 of the Act provides the use of clauses in agreements that prohibit or restrict the making of protected disclosures, exclude or limit the operation of the provisions of the Act, preclude a person from bringing any proceedings under or by virtue of the Act, and or preclude a person from bringing proceedings for breach of contract in respect of anything done on consequences of the making of a protected disclosure. It is clear, therefore, that the existing Act already protects workers against criminal liability and the use of NDAs. The group also proposes a provision to establish a statutory duty on all public bodies to initiate timely, impartial and transparent investigations, require publication of anonymised progress reports, and empower the Commission to levy financial and disciplinary sanctions for failure to act. Again, the essence of this provision is already included in the existing Act. Section 6A and 7A of the Act set out the requirements for timely and impartial assessment and follow-up of reports of wrongdoings through both internal and external reporting channels. In relation to the proposal requiring transparent investigations, it is important to note that neither the Act nor the EU directive which it transposed requires that an investigation is carried out for every report of alleged wrongdoing received. In many cases, an investigation may not be appropriate, as no prima facie evidence of a relevant wrongdoing may have been discovered, or the issues highlighted in a report may not meet the definition of the relevant wrongdoing as set out in Section 5.3 of the Act. Some reports may also highlight issues that are more appropriately addressed through the complaints or through HR processes. The group also proposes a requirement for the provision of anonymised progress reports. Again, Section 16 of the Act sets out that every effort must be made to protect the identity of the reporting person. Section 14A of the Act also states that any person who breaches the duty of confidentiality as set out in Section 16 commits an offence. The penalty for committing this offence is, on summary conviction, a Class A fine or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 12 months, or both on conviction on indictment to a fine not exceeding €75,000 or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years, or both. It should also be noted that given the nature of some of the reports of wrongdoing, simply anonymising progress reports would not be sufficient to prevent the transmission of information from which the identity of the reporting person could be directly or indirectly could be figured out. In short, this proposal is not workable, taking into account the duty to protect the identity of the reporting person already enshrined in the Act. Besides the technical flaws that are evident in the proposals put forward by the group, there are other fundamental issues and reasons to oppose these proposals. Section 2A of the existing Act requires a statutory review to be carried out no later than 5 years after the Act is passed. The Act was passed in July 22, and therefore a review is due to be completed in 27. A public consultation will be carried out in advance of this commencement date, and the views of all stakeholders will be sought. This public consultation will provide a complete picture of the experience of the Protected Disclosures Act since commencement, and will lead to well thought out and evidence-based recommendations for improvements to the legislation. Further, on the 3rd of July 24, the EU Commission presented a report on the transposition of the EU Whistleblowers Directive of 2019 to 1937. This report stated that a review of the directive, which is referred to in Article 27.3, would be finalised no later than 2026. This review or evaluation will assess the functioning of the directive and consider the need for additional measures, including amendments with a view to extending its scope to further EU acts or areas. So, given the EU Commission's review is to be finalised, and that a statutory review is due to commence well in advance of the review of the proposed provisions set out in the motion, it is necessary to oppose the motion and await the results of the EU's Commission review and the statutory review. This would allow for a more considered and evidence-based potential amendment of the existing Act, and within a shorter time frame. In conclusion, I would like to thank very sincerely the members of the Independent Technical Group for bringing forward a debate on the Protected Disclosures legislation. For the reasons I have made clear, the Government must oppose this motion here today, putting forward a counter-motion for the House to note that the existing legislation already provides the protections desired by the independent deputies, and that both the national and EU scheduled reviews should be allowed to take place unhindered in order to achieve a rounded, evidence-based policy position for any potential amendments to the legislation in the future.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, can I ask you to move the motion, please? The amendment, sorry. Minister, can I ask you to move the amendment,
Yes,
please?
I move.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is last Independent Technical Group, 10 minutes, Deputy Michael Collins.
Thanks very much. First of all, I'd like to thank our staff, John Campbell, Mark Nolan and Emmett Corcoran for putting all of this PMB before us here in the Dáil today. Simply put, Minister, this motion is to strengthen whistleblower protections. This motion is about enforcement and accountability in public administration. The treatment of whistleblowers in this country has been an absolute disgrace. This motion is about trying to change that. Whistleblowers are the truth tellers in our society. They shine a light on the wrongdoing, protect public funds and uphold integrity in our institutions. Yet, despite the Protected Disclosures Act and its alignment with the EU Whistleblowing Directive, too many brave individuals have paid a heavy price for doing the right thing. Careers destroyed, disclosures delayed and coercive confidentiality agreements used to silence the truth. This is not justice, and this is not acceptable. The scale of whistleblowing in Ireland today shows why this motion matters. In 2023 alone, 1,162 protected disclosures were made to public bodies. 734 of those reports required follow-up, and 161 cases were sent for further proceedings. One single disclosure in the HSE led to $3.7 million being recovered for the taxpayer. That is the value of speaking up. But here's the reality. The Workplace Relations Commission saw whistleblowers' complaints triple last year, with 301 cases, a 201% increase. That tells us something is broken. People are still being penalised for telling the truth. And let me say this. As a public representative, we see every day how secrecy and bureaucracy undermines trust. Take the housing in the council, for example. Some of us spend months making representations, attending meetings, fighting for families who desperately need a home. And then when a house is allocated, the local authority now have made a decision. They won't tell you who got the house in our own constituencies. That's madness gone wrong. And if we are the ones doing the work, we should be told the outcome. That lack of transparency is the same culture that punishes whistleblowers. It's about control, not about accountability. Or look at school transport. Parents come to us, giving us all their details and ask for help to getting just a bus seat for their child. Now they have to send an email authorising us to act on their behalf before we can even contact Bus Éireann. Another layer of bureaucracy. Why? Do they think that we make up stories as TDs that the child wants to get a bus seat? No, we don't. But it's all this system to try and burn you out and make you walk away from the truth. That attitude, basically because too many officers don't want to give answers. That attitude avoid responsibility, avoid scrutiny, is exactly what this motion seeks to change. Earlier this year, I raised a shocking issue about financial advisors in West Cork and Kinsale. People poured hundreds of thousands of their own private money into investments, thinking they were safe because these advisors were regulated by the Central Bank. Fast forward, but when we finally got a meeting with the Central Bank, they told us, yes, the advisors are regulated, but they can sell unregulated products. I'll say that again. Regulated advisors selling unregulated products. The people who lost their life savings are devastated, mentally, emotionally, financially, in their own way. They are whistleblowers too. They spoke up, embarrassed and broken because the system failed them. And closer to home, I've seen local whistleblowers, home helps who came to me and said they were ready to work, but patients were being told there was no one available. When I raised the issue here in the Dáil, one of them home helps lost their hours. That's retaliation. That's the punishment for speaking the truth. Whistleblowers come in all walks of life, ordinary people who refuse to stay silent when something is wrong. The motion is about giving those people real protection. It calls for swift, independent investigations, enforceable sanctions for obstruction, and personal accountability for officials who destroy evidence or delay inquiries. It bans coercive NDAs, demands transparency through quarterly reporting, and expands the powers of the Protected Disclosures Commissioner. It even proposes a pilot reward scheme for disclosure that recover public funds, because honesty should never come at a personal cost. Protecting whistleblowers is not just a legal obligation, it is a constitutional duty under Article 40.3 of Bunarach na Héireann, and a moral imperative. Other countries reward whistleblowers. In the United States, whistleblowers who help recover public funds can receive up to 30,000 of the amount recovered. Ireland needs to follow that lead. Australia and Canada have strict timelines for investigation delays or penalised. We should adopt similar standards. If we fail to act, we fail those who risk everything to defend the public interest. The message we need to send is in Ireland: truth will never be punished. Those who expose wrongdoing will be protected, supported and vindicated. And I am very disappointed to hear your Minister saying that you are going to oppose this motion and put in a counter-motion. That's a delaying tactic. That's kicking honesty down the road, Minister. You should be ashamed of yourselves across there to do that this evening. And consider it again. Reconsider your decision.
Gaurav Magat, Carlock. We all personally know or locally are aware of whistleblowers. I know some myself, people who are vital to protecting the public interest. These are the individuals who call out corruption, waste, incompetence, bullying and abuse, including our distinguished guests in the public gallery today. But all too often, as we've seen, they pay a price for their transparency and their honesty. The proposals before us today, sorry, there's a phone call interrupting, sorry. The proposals before us today are about changing that, going beyond the Protected Disclosures Act 2014 and ensuring that any legislation has teeth. It's about making sure that whistleblowers are protected, supported and even respected within every sector. So take my colleague's first proposal that very simply every public body must investigate whistleblower reports quickly and fairly. No delays, no excuses. And if they fail, a new Office of Protected Disclosures Commissioner would have the power to sanction them. That's how we make sure disclosures aren't ignored. It's not rocket science, and implementing it may require massive changes in culture, and we will experience institutional resistance, but this has to be overcome. Then there's the measure seeking personal responsibility. So if an official obstructs an investigation, destroys evidence or lies, they should face additional criminal charges to what's already there, which should help stop cover-ups. I especially like the proposal to give whistleblowers the right to go more easily to the High Court to force an investigation so that the courts can compel action not coming from elsewhere. Obviously, this itself needs to be in turn protected from abuse and spurious claims, but if done right, it's a safety valve if the system fails otherwise. Whistleblowers, as we've seen, often suffer retaliation, and it can be very subtle. So I support proposals for reinstatement, full compensation and exemplary damages, including a more detailed analysis and appreciation of what constitutes constructive dismissal. Again, it mightn't always be possible, but striving to make it the norm is laudable. Tied in with this is the need for a legal aid and support fund, so whistleblowers and sometimes their families can get representation, counselling and assistance. Speaking up Carlock should not mean financial ruin or personal collapse as it has in the past. Again, we have to have checks and balances, but the motion before us should be tested with supporting additional legislation. Similarly, the issue of gagging clauses in non-disclosure agreements should be banned or hugely restricted. I do take on board what Minister Healy-Rae said in relation to Section 15 of the existing Act, but coercion and intimidation is currently very difficult to prove. And no whistleblower should ever be silenced against their will for pursuing the common good, whether it's by tangible actions, threats, ghosting or anything more subtle. Public bodies should therefore have to certify every year that they've not used prohibited non-disclosure and that no staff have inferred or implied the same. You also need accountability, which is why publishing the quarterly data showing which bodies failed to meet deadlines makes sense, along with sanctions for repeated failures that escalative action isn't taken. I welcome this proposal provides also for independent oversight and a review after 3 years to test whether reforms are working, which is why I can't understand how the government couldn't take them on board and even integrate with the existing legislation. Thank you, Gaurav Magat. But I amn't totally sold on the suggestion for a whistleblower reward scheme. I do note it's worked to an extent in the United States, albeit under a different system and a different mindset to our own. But we should certainly look at best practice, and in this context, I don't have a problem with a pilot, and neither should the government. We need to make investigations mandatory, punish obstruction and publish it, protect jobs for conscientious employees and provide real support. This will better help the decent people shine a light on wrongdoing and ensure that whistleblowers are treated as friends of the public interest and not, as is all too often the case, as enemies of the state. So if we're serious about integrity in public life, we must be serious about protecting our whistleblowers. I don't know if the reforms proposed will move in their own selves Ireland from a culture of historic bureaucratic omerta to a culture of accountability overnight, but they're certainly worthy of scrutiny and not to be dismissed out of hand like they have been. I support overall the proposals being put forward today by my colleagues, and hopefully the Government will reflect on what's been said today and examine every angle closely, either when further private members' legislation comes forward or possibly by the Government bringing forward amendments as suggested to the existing legislation.
Thank you. Now the Sinn Féin Staff Deputy Mairead Farrell, Deputy Pat Buckley, 5 minutes each.
I just want to begin with saying that I think the response by government was actually outrageous today. We have whistleblowers here today who clearly fed into this fantastic motion that Independent Ireland put forward, and all we literally got from the Minister there was gaslighting. To say, first of all, that it isn't a bill and that's the result that you can't back it is nonsense. Myself and Pat Buckley brought a bill forward 4 years ago, or 3 years ago. Actually, 4 years ago, yeah, 4 years ago. And it wasn't acted upon. And also this has recommendations in it. Then there's talk about the EU review. Sure, the whole reason we had the changes in the whistleblower legislation last time was because of the transposition of the EU directive. And what came out of it from government was weak. That's why we're here. So I just have to say I'd hope that there'd be a stronger response later on from ministers. But I'll go back to the speech that I actually had prepared. It just that angered me this morning. I want to begin by commending all whistleblowers for everything that they have done, because fundamentally the reason that they are whistleblowers is because fundamentally they know the difference between what is right and what is wrong. These are people who saw injustice and used their voice to speak truth to power, and continue to do so clearly to this day. To our great shame, so many whistleblowers have faced persecution as a result. They have lost their jobs, been bullied, been blacklisted, and have faced huge consequences in their professional and personal lives, including experiencing homelessness as a result. The Irish people owe these people our deepest gratitude. Without them, we would not know about many scandals which have been exposed over the years. So Gurmila Mila Mahagi, and thank you for coming here today. And I want to commend Independent Ireland for bringing forward this motion. And it is deeply regrettable that despite the opportunity to change things 3 years ago, we are still in a situation whereby whistleblowers do not have the protections that they should have. And the reason we know that is because we hear it from whistleblowers themselves. And it's quite shocking to me that 4 years will have passed next week, when on the 1st of December 2021, myself and my colleague Pat Buckley behind me brought forward a bill in an attempt to strengthen the transposition of the EU directive by the government in 2022. Unfortunately, what the government transposed at the end of the day was simply not strong enough. And one of the cruelest elements of it was that it was not retrospective. To exclude those that were going through live proceedings at the time was unforgivable and a real kick in the teeth for them. And at the time I brought forward an amendment to attempt to rectify that, but it was not taken. What we needed from government was the empowering of the Minister to gather all documents relevant to a protected disclosure made to him or her regarding his or her department or bodies under its authority, and to pass this information on to the AG in connection with the conduct of legal proceedings on behalf of the state. And in July of this year, Minister, I forewarned and I said, when the government was transposing the EU directive on protected disclosures, I was clear at the time and I voiced significant concerns. I felt it was perhaps deliberately going to weaken the transposition. I said I felt the setting up of the Protected Disclosures Office was a retrograde step, and the remove of protected disclosure is a political issue. Previously, an opposition TD could deliver a protected disclosure to the relevant minister and then seek to know what progress had been made. Now the minister can simply say that it has been handled to the Protected Disclosures Office and it has nothing to do with them anymore. And I think we've been clearly proven right in relation to that, and that the campaigners have been proven right in relation to that. What we also needed from government was that the new bill included organisations of less than 50 people. Instead, it excluded them. That was a wrong decision. And when dealing with this issue, it is also important to deal with the facts. Research shows that people lose over €40,000 in the course of their working life as a result. And as we have the hard evidence on that, it is quite clear that financial support should be part of any strengthening of the legislation. And again, we saw that in today's motion. Providing free legal aid and psychological services for whistleblowers and removing the limitations on financial compensation that whistleblowers can win by way of redress are important steps in that regard. Minister, whatever your view or my view was on the transposition of the EU directive, and whether at that time you believed that it was strong enough or whether you didn't, we have to deal with the reality of the situation now. We know that whistleblowers are still being wronged, that whistleblowers still face harassment, backlash as a result of their bravery. Transparency, so if we know that, right, Minister, then we need to act on it, and we have the ability to do so in this chamber. Transparency International says that whistleblowing is acknowledged as one of the most effective ways of stopping wrongdoing. Without whistleblowers, we would live in a very different society. We owe them that, and we need to finally, as a state, acknowledge that. Without firm action, this will continue.
Deputy Buckley.
Thank you, Cian. I welcome the opportunity to speak on this bill this morning. I want to thank Independent Ireland, but more importantly, those in the gallery, the heroes of the state that get absolutely battered for telling the truth. It's an absolute, utter disgrace. I have a script here, for sure. I listened to the Minister's comments a while ago, and the government amendment when it says whistleblowers have at their disposal effective channels to report breaches of EU rules of confidentiality, both internally within an organisation or externally. Whistleblowers' reports are properly investigated and are acted upon by the organisations and competent authorities, and whistleblowers are protected from retaliation. That's in your amendments. Absolute verbal diarrhoea. Because I have it. I've listened. I have brought protected disclosures to 2 Taoiseachs, 4 ministers over the last 3 or 4 years. A man is now deceased who got killed in Stryker in Toole 2 years ago. It's still ongoing. I ran about protected disclosure. I've had a good friend of mine who came in to me last Friday. This is going on 7 years with Scouting Ireland, and the abuse to children from a now deceased school teacher and scout leader who I knew myself, didn't associate. And the state has 7 years changing, and especially Scouting Ireland, changing their legal teams to stall. But when the whistleblowers come forward, they're being absolutely battered and punished. Millions has been spent on public money, making legal teams rich, and nobody's getting an answer. I go back to 2002, we had 59 suicides in East Cork. Out of that, 23 were all around the same age. I know it's going to upset some people. I know 4 people that are above in that graveyard. Because when people made protected disclosures, it wasn't acted on. This aggressive man was the head of the Diocese of Clyde Scouts, the regional director. He ran the Mount Millery system. The system was absolutely rotten and failed I don't know how many people. So when we're talking about protected disclosures, we need to take it as serious as possible. As you can hear it in my voice, because Mairead Farrell said it there, we'll go. We introduced an alternative bill here in 2022. As what Deputy Farrell said there was all the provisions, mental health, counselling, supports for families. My whistleblowers in the last protected disclosure that brought in here, every single one of those whistleblowers were paid off by the company. Paid off. The now deceased family, that family has been split purposely. I've been threatened for telling the truth. They've come back into me, some of the whistleblowers again, last Monday, and told me they've been blacklisted. They can't get a job anywhere. So when we're talking about protected disclosure here, remember each one of those and what happened to themselves and their families. Please, please take it seriously and take on board. And Deputy Farrell was right, this thing about waiting for the EU. We waited 18 months for that directive to come from the EU so we could put in a bill and do the right thing. Because normally, you know, when you come into this chamber, you're trying to, you know, serve the people that you're supposed to serve outside of here and do the right thing. But by God, no matter how many times you try and tell the truth in this country, you're going to get battered, punished, and the perpetrator walks down skips down the yellow brick road as if nothing happens. So please, I would ask you to actually withdraw your amendment and do the right thing and support Independence Ireland and try and move it forward. And I certainly can tell you that we'll be back to have another crack at this protected disclosure bill again. Thank you.
I want to thank the Technical Independent Group for bringing forward this motion today. It's very important. And I want to thank those in the gallery who have paid the price and their families and those who aren't with us today. And I think Deputy Buckley rightly remembers those who are no longer here. So we are here today to confront a profound failure, a failure of law, a failure of protection and a failure of leadership. A failure that punishes the brave and protects the powerful. A failure that tells every ordinary person in this state, do not speak up or you will pay the price. Today I want to speak about protected disclosures on Garda Síochána. And at the outset, I want to commend the members of An Garda Síochána who serve the force and serve this country with dignity and dedication. A constituent reported domestic violence by a serving An Garda Síochána. A criminal investigation began. Separately, this constituent made a protected disclosure to Forsoo, detailing interference, protection and cover-up by some colleagues within An Garda Síochána. This disclosure also highlighted systemic issues around the ability of some members of An Garda Síochána to impartially investigate cases of domestic violence. What followed exposes the deep inadequacy of our legislation. Every time the protected disclosure progressed, the defence made a disclosure order every single time. The criminal trial was delayed again and again. Forsoo had to put the protected disclosure investigation in abeyance, effectively frozen. The protections promised by this government were suspended, and the whistleblower was left exposed, vulnerable, punished for their honesty. After the guilty plea, the investigation resumed, but crucial parts could no longer be examined because too much time had passed, delayed by the very process that was meant to be resumed. But crucial parts could no longer be examined because too much time had passed, delayed by the very process that was meant to protect whistleblowers. The law that was meant to protect this individual became the barrier to justice itself. The system failed them. And here is the hard truth. Once the protected disclosure was disclosed to the accused, the organisation it had alleged wrongdoing against, an impartial investigation became impossible. I have 7.5 minutes. Evidence can be shaped, witnesses can be influenced, records can be altered or destroyed, justice can be quietly denied. This is not a minor flaw, it is systemic failure. The government has known about this gap but still continued to send a very clear and chilling message. If you speak up about criminal activity in An Garda Síochána, you cannot be guaranteed that the wrongdoings will be exposed. If you show courage, the system may very well punish you for it. This is the reality, this is the message, and this is the government's failure. That is the message whistleblowers are hearing across this state, and it is a message that should shame any government that claims to stand up for transparency, accountability or justice. Urgent, meaningful reform is needed. The Protected Disclosures Act must guarantee confidentiality, even during criminal proceedings, prevent disclosure orders from destroying investigations, protect whistleblowers from retaliation, delays in justice and exposure, and ensure that the law cannot be weaponised against victims.
Hear, hear. And I want to thank the deputies for using their PMB time to facilitate this debate on protection for whistleblowers. And I really, from the bottom of my heart, I welcome every single one of the whistleblowers that have the bravery to come and to be here today with us. And I also want to say a word for those people who simply cannot speak up. Those people who have been beaten by the system, who have been battered by the state. Those people for whom their protected disclosure represented in some instances the end of their life, certainly the end of any mental peace that they have. And Minister, Junior Minister Healy-Rae rambled in, and in his script, we all have a copy of it here, he said that the Protected Disclosures Act is Ireland's national whistleblower protection law. This legislation was designed to protect workers from penalisation for speaking up about wrongdoing in the workplace. Well, now, Junior Minister Healy-Rae didn't stay for the whole debate, but I hope he looks back on this, because I would ask him to go up to the gallery and ask those people if they feel protected. Ask them if they feel that the state protected them. Minister, before I was elected, I was a trade union official, and I have sat with people whose lives were destroyed because they spoke up, they wanted to make things better. And you might never know their names, but I sat in their living rooms, I sat in their kitchens, they sat in my car. A nurse in the west of Ireland speaking up about mismanagement within the health service. Her hair fell out. Her marriage was destroyed. Her kids didn't even recognise their mother anymore. And it started off with no access to night duty, no access to overtime. She was ostracised. It was rumours. Now, you won't see her in the gallery, because her life was destroyed. There is no protection for whistleblowers. Ask them, Minister. Go up and ask them if they feel protected. And if they don't, withdraw your amendment and do the decent thing.
Deputy Conor McGuinness.
And I too want to begin by addressing those in the gallery, the whistleblowers who have come here to watch this debate. And Minister, they're watching and they're listening and they're taking stock of everything that has been said by your colleague here. But really I want to thank you for the service you've done to this state, and the many people behind you, the people who, as Deputy O'Reilly said, never made it here, can't be here, the families, the lost opportunity, because of issues around corruption, illegality, theft, crime within elements of the public service going back decades that would never have come to the light were it not for the courage and the strength and the dedication and the public service of people who blew the whistle, who said enough is enough and I can no longer have this on my conscience, I'm going to bring this out in the open. And by God, they paid the price. They were harassed and harangued. They were bullied. There were attempts made to bribe them, to blacken their names, to blacklist them, to hurt their families, to take their children from them, to take their livelihoods from them, to do them into the ground, to bury them by this state and by agencies of this state and by people operating on behalf of the state and successive governments. And that needs to be reckoned with. But the best way that we can reckon with that is ensuring that it never, ever happens again to another whistleblower. Because God knows there will be elements of misdeeds and illegality and cutting corners and corruption within elements of the public service. It is a feature of human endeavour, unfortunately, but thank God there are people who have the courage to stand up and do the right thing. Sinn Féin is strongly supporting the technical group's bill motion before today, and we urge you, Minister, to bring this back. The strength of the arguments that you're hearing in the chamber from all parties and none on this issue, to bring that back to government and withdraw your amendment to this motion that seeks to undermine it in the way that so many whistleblowers across the state have been undermined. So do the right thing, support a functioning democracy, a functioning public service that has the protections for whistleblowers, for those who do the right thing and who display courage and display a strong dedication to public service.
Deputy
Bennett. Firstly, I'd like to welcome the whistleblowers to the gallery here. You have done an incredible service to the state, and I just want to thank you personally. I also like to thank Independent Ireland for bringing this PMB forward today. This has brought to the state the corruption that has happened within our political and justice systems, and it's opened the door to justice and to the victims of abuse. And in return, far too many of you and others have seen their lives ruined. And the question that the government must answer is this by intention or by design? And even if unintentional, that the whistleblower framework that you have overseen would be made fit for purpose.
because whistleblowers today continue to face the consequences of doing the right thing. They face smear campaigns, they have lost their homes, their livelihoods, and all the while the government just have failed to protect them. You will waste taxpayer money. You need to help the people. Sinn Féin hold whistleblowers in the highest of regard. We recognise the positive role that many have played in bringing the truth to light, and I would like to commend my party colleagues, Sinn Féin spokesperson on public expenditure and reform, Deputy Mairead Farrell, and Deputy Pat Buckley, who tried to bring this PMB to the Dáil before. This legislation would move the onus from the employee to the employer in cases where an employee alleges penalisation as a result of making a protected disclosure. It would also make an attempt to hinder or penalise a person making a protected disclosure an offence. This is crucial, Minister. It's long past time for smears to end. Instead, we have a Taoiseach who, in his view, does not believe he or his ministers should not be across a protected disclosure in making this regard to his department. In some instances, potentially leaving officials subject to potential disclosure responsible for it. So today, Minister, in your new role, maybe you can see fit to support this motion and protect the whistleblowers.
Nash, 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I want to thank Independent Ireland for tabling this motion this morning. This is an issue that's very close to my heart and is very personal. I want to welcome, like other colleagues, those who have gathered in the gallery this morning, people who have taken enormous personal risks to do what is right. And not only have you all served the people in your role as civil and public servants, but you have doubly served the people in taking risks to expose wrongdoing in your places of work. And you have been at the forefront, if you believe it or not, or accept it or not, given what you've gone through. You've been at the forefront of initiating significant change. Now, I have some history and personal attachment to the principle of what is termed whistleblowing. And I'm proud of the small role that I played over 10 years ago now in helping to develop what was then pioneering legislation from my colleague Brendan Howlin, and that was the 2014 Protected Disclosures Act. Now, I come from a political tradition of reformers, a movement that believes in solidarity, in supporting people where injustices are being done, where people are encouraged and supported to tell the truth, and where individual citizens, once empowered and protected, can do great and important things. And it is in this tradition that the 2014 Act and the subsequent 2015 Code of Practice for the WRC that I signed into law came into being. And the intention and ambition of that legislation was wide-ranging, and it was, and the principles still are, laudable. The law then and now is first and foremost legislation that should be, at all times, and that should intend to be all about the protection of whistleblowers who report wrongdoing in their organisation from dismissal and any form of penalisation. And in its implementation by officials in far too many cases, it has too often fallen short of those ambitions. And too many people have been dragged through the mire and have been destroyed. It and the supporting material, the legislation and supporting material and the code of practice that I referred to earlier on, does go into great detail, setting out what all of this involves, what penalisation looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like, in case anyone at all is capable of misunderstanding it, deliberately or otherwise. And I'd cause to look again at the material on the WRC website associated with the code of practice, and frankly it could not be clearer. And here are just some of the terms used, in case people haven't seen it or aren't aware of it, when it talks about penalisation. It refers to suspension, dismissal, demotion, disciplining, unfair treatment, discrimination, harassment, threat of reprisal. I could go on. We're aware of all of this. It talks about, and I quote, a culture of encouraging workers to speak out if they have genuine concerns. Now, the PTA legislation that was enacted in 2014 and has since been revised and amended and updated as per the EU directive in 2022 has given a voice and legislative protections, at least, to workers who have time and again taken their courage into their hands, raised their voices and gone through all of the channels laid out in the legislation to make protected disclosures, perhaps over serious wrongdoing, initially to a designated person within their own workplace or externally, or in some specific cases to a government minister, or through other means laid out in the Act and in the Code. And this will have led, and it has led, to concrete changes in workplaces, the uncovering of malpractice, of fraud, of other criminal acts. And to those who have done this, we all owe you a debt of sincere gratitude. And to those who have done the right thing, but have been let down badly by a system that is obliged to protect and support you, and who have been abused, humiliated, diminished, forced out of your work, we all owe you a system of whistleblowing that works as it was always intended to do. Now, it can be argued, and I would argue to a point, notwithstanding the motion, that we are not actually in need of new legislation. We are in need of proper implementation and enforcement of the legislation that is already on the statute books. Now, I had the opportunity to speak last night with Noel McCree, and Noel is with us today. His experience is well known, but perhaps not as well understood by the wider public as it ought to be. He did the right thing. His claims were proven to have been correct, and he has suffered, as has been said earlier on, inordinately. If cases like Noel's keep emerging, then we have a system that needs to be constantly reviewed and revised to ensure that the legislation is always, in all cases, being adhered to and implemented and enforced. And where there are failures, there needs to be accountability. Remember, it is people who are responsible for systems and failures in those systems. People. In too many cases I've seen, processes set down in law have been treated as unimportant by some people whose job it is to manage, engage and handle and process complaints. And while it may be the case that it is a minority of workers that make protected disclosures who experience detrimental effects, this is hardly the point. This is hardly the point. The scale and extent of the apparent campaigns of reprisals experienced by many who have gone public and have spoken about the toll and upheaval they and their families have experienced once they blew the whistle and were entitled to the full protection of the Act but were failed must not go unnoticed by anyone. And going back to Noel McCree, he and I agree, we discussed this last night and we've had email exchanges, that the legislation we do have does, in theory, provide protections, strong protections for whistleblowers. It's the implementation where the problems arise. And we can have all the fine legislation and regulation in the world. However, if bodies aren't resourced and if the law is not enforced, then this brings the system into disrepute. Well-intentioned law is not what we want. It's enforcement and citizens having the confidence that when they follow their conscience, when they do what is right and report wrongdoing, that there is a well-resourced system that sees disclosures that are made in good faith through the correct channels and in compliance with the letter and spirit of the Act, processed properly, where regular communication is made with the complainant, where disclosures are adjudicated fairly and where things actually demonstrably change as a result of that risk being taken. Because this is a system that rests and depends on the trust and confidence of the public. And this is why there is an onus on those who are in positions of responsibility to be unequivocal, unambiguously clear on what they say in the Dáil and to not mislead, however unintentional that may be. And this takes me to comments made on the record of the House on the 12th of November by the Taoiseach in respect of the handling of protected disclosures. In essence, he appears to have claimed that there is somehow a form of prohibition of some description on a minister reading a protected disclosure that was duly submitted to them, and the claim seems to have been made that he has legal advice to that effect. Now, this is arrant nonsense, and it would be useful and in the public interest if he clarified his comments. The functions of ministers receiving a relevant protected disclosure and what happens to that disclosure next is clearly laid out, and I would hope well understood by ministers. Again, this has been raised with me by Noel McCree, who has also raised connected concerns over the application of the Carltona principle and the real-world potential for cases to be handled and processed without complete ministerial knowledge, and in situations, and this is important, where independence may be called into question. And this is a matter that does require vigilance. And one deputy mentioned earlier on the cases and protected disclosures made by members of the Defence Forces Justice Alliance. And those very same issues that were raised involve concerns being expressed over the independence of those who may be handling complaints and potential conflicts of interest. And this is something that we need to be alive to. We're also well aware of the practice of whistleblowers being forced out of their work on grounds of ill health. And this seems to me to be an all too familiar occurrence, and how this can be used as a means to effectively blacklist and ensure that the person does not work again. Now, all of this just serves to illustrate how far things can go and the impact on those who make protected disclosures when the system decides to encircle the wagons. Now, some significant strides have been made in the 2022 Act, and that is acknowledged. And some amendments I made, colleagues in Sinn Féin and other parties made, in my view, should have been adopted by government at the time, but unfortunately weren't. And I feel that we will be revisiting that again. But the proof of the pudding, as the saying goes, will be in the eating. Again, it's all well and good having excellent legislation on paper, but the test is the enforcement of its provisions at all times and in all cases, no exceptions. In this case, it's important to note that there appears to it appears that some of the new provisions, especially the provision in relation to specifying defined acts of penalisation of criminal acts, that there is very little familiarity in the agencies responsible for prosecuting around those provisions and how they are actually properly applied. Now, there may very well be resource issues in that regard, but it is important when legislation is enacted in this House that the authorities that are responsible for prosecuting and processing complaints in that regard know what they're doing, engage properly with complainants, and that justice is done.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Cian O'Callaghan.
Firstly, I just want to thank the independent deputies for tabling this motion. This is a very important area that does need proper scrutiny and debate. And I very much want to welcome the whistleblowers who are with us today in the Dáil, in the gallery. I want to thank them and indeed every whistleblower for the service that they've given to the country. Their bravery and courage should be supported by all of us. They act in the public interest, and their role in democracy is incredibly important. And I don't think that was recognised by Minister Healy-Rae when he was in here sufficiently in terms of his comments. There didn't seem to be any recognition from Minister Healy-Rae that whistleblowers are often penalised, smeared, blacklisted and persecuted. Is he and the government not aware of this, or simply not concerned about this? He was incredibly quick after he gave his contribution. He couldn't leave quick enough from the chamber. Didn't want to stay around and hear any of the further contributions on this. Whistleblowers have had their lives destroyed, even lost, and there's been untold mental health repercussions for people who've done the right thing by coming forward to expose waste and corruption and wrongdoing. If the government was serious about tackling waste, corruption and wrongdoing, then the government would be very, very serious about protecting whistleblowers, and that's not what we heard from Minister Healy-Rae early on. We owe a debt of gratitude to whistleblowers. At the very least, there should be strong and proper protections for all whistleblowers. Cathy, the Integrity at Work survey in 2023 found that 50% of women who said they reported wrongdoing suffered negative consequences, and 37% of men. They are startlingly high figures. No recognition of that again in the comments from Minister Healy-Rae. Seems to be oblivious to it, or simply doesn't care. That's an incredibly high amount of people coming forward reporting wrongdoing, who are being persecuted and suffering negative consequences as a result. And yet we don't hear from the government any immediate action or urgent action that they're going to do about We do know that staff in organisations where there is external advice and support made available, either through being a member of a union or through the Speak Up helpline or other supports, we know that the level of persecution and negative consequences is lower in those organisations. So it's really important that employers make their employees and make potential whistleblowers aware of those supports. They're not enough to mitigate the negative consequences, but they do help. I think the Taoiseach's comments on November 12th were misinformed comments in relation to the role of ministers in terms of sight of protected disclosures that are made to ministers are very worrying, and I do call on the Minister to clarify those comments. If you have at the head of government misinformed commentary being made in relation to whistleblower legislation, that sends out a very serious signal to the rest of the country, so that needs to be clarified urgently. There's a number of things that can be done to improve the situation now for whistleblowers. Legal aid, for example, to whistleblowers should be extended. That is envisaged in the EU Whistleblowing Directive. Hasn't been done. We need to be fully compliant with the directive. While there is free legal advice available, there is counselling available, the lack of free legal aid is an absolutely major flaw, and that should be brought in straight away. The cap on compensation for whistleblowers under the Protected Disclosures Act, that should be removed. Awards should be made only on the principle of what is just and what is equitable. And that cap particularly discriminates against low-paid workers who come forward, and particularly discriminates against workers in the financial services sector, many of whom most of their remuneration can come through, or significant amounts can come through bonuses, and that's not taken into account with that cap. I don't think that cap should apply to anyone. It should be based on what's just and equitable, but it particularly penalises people who are low-paid or coming forward from financial services with bonuses. There should be proper training for everyone in the Workplace Relations Commission, adjudicators around whistleblowing protected disclosures law. There's clearly insufficient knowledge of the legislation there. And fundamentally, we need to enact the long-awaited Public Sector Standards Bill to provide ethics training to all public officials. That bill was brought forward in 2015. 10 years later, we're still waiting. Why is the government, that's straightforward, nothing controversial in it, why hasn't that been brought forward 10 years later? What on earth are you waiting for? The lack of enforcement powers for the Office of Protected Disclosures, that needs to be addressed. For example, we've seen that the Dental Council failed to act in a very serious situation. The lack of enforcement powers means there's nothing that can be done when a body chooses not to act after serious issues have been uncovered. The issue of continuous penalisation needs to be addressed in the legislation. Workers can be penalised, and often are penalised, beyond the 6-month or 1 year in exceptional circumstances that is allowed for in the Act. And yet when that happens, there is no protection or provision for them in the legislation. This time limit should run from the date of the last instant of penalisation. That would make it fairer. But even then, you do have to take into account it can take time for people to come forward. When they are penalised, that can be shocking, it can be traumatic. It can take time for someone to process that. It can then take time for them to talk to friends, or family, or union, or workplace supports, and then take time for them to figure out what they need to do. So even at that, there needs to be sufficient time given. People do not expect to be in these situations, do not expect to be dealing with them, and it can take time for them to work through what is going on, to realise that there's protections in the legislation. So short time frames like that can be very, very prohibitive. The Office of Protected Disclosures Commissioner themselves have identified a number of areas where there's gaps in the regulatory and oversight framework. These include private congregated residential settings, home support services, non-professionals working in GP and dental practices, and indeed accommodation centres for people seeking international protection. So these gaps urgently need to be addressed. Challenges in terms of transmitting disclosures in local authorities have also been identified. that needs to be addressed. And furthermore, some prescribed persons, public and private, are failing to ensure that their protected disclosure channels are clearly visible and readily accessible. That's a major failing in the implementation that needs to be addressed. There is the issue of bodies failing to act. For example, if the person making a protected disclosure is anonymous, serious allegations are sometimes not followed up on. This is completely wrong, and the legislation needs to be changed to ensure that that cannot happen. There needs to be a legal requirement to act on useful and verifiable information from anonymous sources. Now, some public bodies do that, but this is not taking place across the board, and that has to happen. The Act doesn't oblige recipients to follow up on the anonymous disclosures. They're often ignored, or the recipient declines to take action. Recipients should follow up in circumstances where there is proper information and where that shows that there's relevant, or there could be a relevant wrongdoing. This could be done not necessarily with a change to the legislation. It could be enough for the Minister to revise the statutory guidance on this, making it clear that information must be assessed and investigated where it tends to show relevant wrongdoing, irrespective of whether the identity of the whistleblower is known. And indeed, where that happens, efforts should be made to communicate with the anonymous whistleblower in order to build up trust. This can be a particular issue, can take time, particularly more so with women, where it can take more time maybe to move from being anonymous. Public bodies which are expected to accept anonymous disclosures under statutory guidance. However, this has to be extended to employers in the private and indeed in the not-for-profit sector. So I'd say to you, Minister, there's a huge amount that needs to be done. This needs to be taken very seriously by government. The response by Minister Healy-Rae did not show an intent by government to take this with the seriousness as needed. It was really disrespectful and slapping face to whistleblowers who have been persecuted and penalised. I hope in your remarks that you show them the recognition that is needed and that you show the urgency to address this that is needed. Gurv Margaret.
Thank you. The Independent and Parties Technical Group, Deputy Paul Murphy, Deputy Boyd-Barrett, 5 minutes each.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for those who brought forward this motion, which we support. Mostly thanks, and I'd like to pay tribute to the whistleblowers who are in the gallery and those who are at home and elsewhere. It's actually one of the privileges of my job is that I get to meet whistleblowers while they're in the process of whistleblowing, get to work with them as they're trying to bring justice, do good in whatever sphere they're working in. And what's kind of interesting is I've met a whole bunch of whistleblowers at this stage working in different areas of the world or of kind of industry. And, you know, these aren't people who just to look at are extraordinary person. They look like just anybody else. You know, there isn't a sign above their head saying heroic person, extremely brave person. These are kind of ordinary people who just take a decision to do the right thing, that they see wrong being done, be it springs inserted wrongly into children, be it operations, unnecessary operations being given to children, be it abuse taking place in our care homes, be it wrongdoing in the Irish prison service, be it abuse or mistreatment of animals and of workers at Dublin Zoo. They see things that are taking place that they know are wrong and decide, I'm going to do the right thing about this. And what opens up for them then, I think in some cases, isn't really what they expect. You know, they're going to do the right thing, they make a protected disclosure, and then in many cases, they face very, very serious consequences in terms of their whole life. Very serious harassment. We've heard a lot correctly about Noel McGrath, who has ended up being evicted with his family into homelessness, which flows from protected disclosures for which he was vindicated in the Irish prison service. But steadfastly, these people do the right thing. And you know, many times we see on prime time or whatever, some major scandal break out that then becomes a major story in here, and out of which some change begins to happen. I think many times the public doesn't know that starts, in most cases, with a whistleblower who calls out the wrongdoing. But these are the cases that we know of. In many cases, there's whistleblowers, there's people who've contacted me who've blown the whistle on various things and never get justice, who get harassed out of their workplace, get forced, you know, never get what they have sought to do by speaking out. And the problem with the government's approach and the problem is with the government's amendment is basically to say, oh yeah, fair play to the whistleblowers, but everything is fine here in terms of legislation, when the reality of people's experiences is that everything is very far from being okay. I want to briefly just recount one whistleblower's experience who's in the gallery, Margot Hannon. Margot was a healthcare assistant. She made a protected disclosure to the HSE regarding serious adult safeguarding failures, breaches of national infection control guidelines, deficiencies in end-of-life care and communication issues. That resulted in a 3-year investigation which was not independent of the HSE, and at the end of which the HSE failed to publish or provide recommendations from the approximately 500-page report. Throughout this period, she experienced stonewalling, reprisals and ultimately constructive dismissal. She made a second protected disclosure to HICWA anonymously regarding serious concerns about suspected gerontophilia and poor infection control practices by a nurse. HICWA found prima facie evidence that wrongdoing may have occurred and referred the matter to the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Ireland. However, the NMBI incorrectly refused to treat the matter as a protected disclosure solely because it had been submitted anonymously. They now wish to treat it as a fitness to practice complaint, which would require disclosure of her identity. The NMBI requested consent to release her name to protect the nurse's right to fair procedures, quote, as required by law. This appears to conflict with the spirit and intent of current protected disclosures legislation, as well as the EU whistleblowing directive. To date, no investigation has been carried out, and the nurse in question continues to have unsupervised access to non-verbal patients with dementia. She says that her strongest wish is that healthcare workers be enabled to make protected disclosures anonymously, including through a solicitor, as is standard practice in other jurisdictions. Just finally, I want to take a moment to correct the record in relation to one point I made with regard to the use of funds by Dublin Zoo to build an extension to the zoo director's house. To clarify, these funds came from unrestricted funds, not a public fundraising appeal. I stand over all the other remarks I made in relation to abuse of animals and harassment of workers at Dublin Zoo. This is about whistleblowers, and I'd like to thank the whistleblowers who bravely brought these important matters of public concern out into the open at great personal cost.
Can I thank Independent Ireland for bringing this motion forward, which we're happy to support. This is an email I got. This is back in 2024, and I've been out sick for a few months, so I'm not sure where this has developed, but it gives you an indication of the despair and the consequences for protected disclosures of a case that I raised and submitted parliamentary questions. Sorry, this is an email back to me following up an issue for her. The issue, by the way, she was working in a children's residential institution with some of the most vulnerable children possible, and she alleged very, very serious allegations against the CEO and the staff of that residential institution with vulnerable children, made a protected disclosure and was concerned that the person in Toole who was looking at the protected disclosure was also somebody who was in regular contact with the institution and therefore was not independent, right? And, you know, so now I'm not in a position to judge the rights and wrongs of this, but you look at the human consequences of it. Sorry, only getting back to you now. I've been dealing with some health issues due to the stress of protective disclosure. Toole were supposed to give me an outcome of the protective disclosure, but never did. Could you please bring the letter to the Minister's attention? I've lost everything due to this protective disclosure. While the people who have done wrong get to prosper, the lengths I went to for the last 20 years to change my life, from traveller barriers I faced to addictions and having my own trauma from the care system. This woman had been through the care system and then worked in it subsequently, doing what I was supposed to do as a mandated person and report wrongdoing. I finished therapy. I'm out of work 5 months. I won't go on, but you get the consequences of it. About very serious concerns that the people who are investigating the protected disclosure, very serious protected disclosure, have a conflict of interest. Here's another example in response. This is to do with members of the Defence Forces who come to me because they were working with they alleged, with dangerous chemicals that affected their health and even their ability to have children, right? And they allege that a presentation you get when you finish in the Defence Forces was denied them because they'd made a protected disclosure. When I put in a PQ about this to the Minister, this is the answer I got. I would like to thank the Deputy for his question. I'm not at liberty to discuss or comment on any protected disclosure. However, I am assured by military management that no member of the Defence Forces is denied anything on foot of having made a protected disclosure. That is unbelievable. So, a member of Defence Forces says military management are penalising them for making a protected disclosure over the behaviour of military management, and the Minister goes to military management to ask, is this true? And military management says, of course it's not true. What else are they going to say? That's an answer from the Minister. It's outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous. And the Minister accepts that. Now, that's either incredible incompetence or, even worse, the Minister is in on it, is in on the attempt to suppress the protected disclosure with military management. Now, stop the clock then, if you're going to interrupt me. Stop the clock.
Just for people
stop the clock.
Public gallery, please desist from making any reaction to any comments that are made. And just to warn the Deputy, any Deputy, not to make any comments about something that might be an ongoing investigation. So just to be careful with comments in relation to that. Thank you.
Lastly, just on foot of Louise O'Reilly's, Deputy O'Reilly's comments about workers, and this goes. It's connected to protected disclosure, but it's more generally about workers facing problems in particular industries and the punishments they suffer. I have raised again and again and again the fact that film workers working in the film industry in this country have been blacklisted out of the industry. People who've worked 20, 30 and 40 years gone out of the industry. Nothing, left with nothing, because they raised questions about the failure to implement things like the fixed-term workers legislation. Now, I know for a fact, right, because I've met some of the line producers who employ the people, and they've said, I'll never be employing them again, based on their view of it. But they're the people who have the power, right? Now, the problem is that there's no independent adjudication of these things, and I have raised it again and again and again, that the workers have no defence against blacklisting in the film industry, even though the Irish state funds the film industry. And what does the Department of Arts do when you say this to them? They go to the people against whom the allegations are made and say, are these allegations true? And the people who get the money from the department say, of course they're not true. Of course they're not true. We're totally innocent. So what else would they say? This has to stop.
Ireland for bringing this forward. I think it's probably fair to say that most of us here grew up from childhood with a moral phrase by our parents or guardians: if you tell the truth, you won't get into trouble. And now we're here in the Chamber and we're dealing with the Protected Disclosure Act of 2014 as amended in 2022 on foot of EU Directive 1937. And I most recently have brought two constituent and professional colleague protective disclosures to the Chamber. PD 2025 number 17 has been raised twice previously. Most definitely both issues are in the public interest, and they have been made with a very strong evidence base. The second is a child safeguarding and Garda vetting issue. Now, I just want to point out that at this point, all correct disclosure procedures have been followed by the reporting persons. So everything in the 86 pages of the 22 Act have been followed. But there has been no follow-up. We've passed the 3-month mark. In one case, we're about to hit the 6-month mark. No follow-up by the OPDC on Garda Síochána, the HPRA, the HSE, the PSI. There isn't supposed to be a penalisation by employment, but in the case of one person, there is absolute penalisation in their employment status. And the compellability piece, in my opinion, is the missing piece. Now, I do note in closing Minister O'Brien's comments yesterday at the Order of Business stage. Whistleblowers should not find their situation affected in a negative way. Unfortunately, that is not the reality. And he also said that he would be, or the government would be, open to looking at improvements. Compellability
and adhering to the strict timelines that are in the existing legislation is the starting point. And in relation to those issues, I would be very grateful, Minister, if there is some way of accelerating the matter that you can embark on as well. Gurv Mahagat.
And their friends in the gallery and supporting this motion, and we all remember Sergeant Maurice McCabe, who exposed corruption and malpractice within the Garda Síochána and the treatment he faced as a result. It led to the Disclosures Tribunal. Recent protected disclosures, which Deputy Toole has mentioned, I have raised here as well, and this House, including one from a healthcare professional, raised deeply serious concerns about systematic failings during the COVID-19 scamdemic. Vaccine rollout and treatment protocols in nursing homes. The disclosures alleged the warnings of safety risks were repeatedly ignored, that informed consent was not obtained, and that regulatory bodies failed to investigate credible reports of harm. They highlight issues such as the suppression of safety data, the misuse of non-disclosure agreements, and the absence of timely investigations, even when lives were at stake. Lives were at stake and lives were lost. The evidence presented points to a pattern of stonewalling, delay and denial. When regulators and public bodies refuse to act on credible warnings, they fail to investigate clusters of sudden deaths, arising adverse events, undermine public trust and violate the legal and ethical obligations. The Department of Health and the Minister and regulatory bodies continue to ignore these protected disclosures. This motion calls for what's currently needed, swift independent investigation into disclosures, and I think we're going to have to go outside our country to get that. Enforceable sanctions for officials who obstruct, and they do, or delay inquiries, legal aid and support for whistleblowers who suffer retaliation, transparency measures including publication of anonymised progress reports and compliance data. We cannot allow a culture where speaking up means career destruction. Whistleblowers act in the public interest. They protect lives. It is time for the state to protect them. And I am seriously calling for the Minister for Health, the Taoiseach, and all the other agencies to deal with the protected disclosure that both Deputy O'Toole and I have taken to this House in good faith. It's a very serious situation that happened during COVID and continues from COVID, but of course we have no investigation into the happenings of COVID, a kind of a desktop experience where I wanted international experts from abroad to come in here for truly independent inquiry, and we need that, and I hope this bill is going to be supported.
Thank you very much, Cathy. I too wish to support the motion and welcome the people in the gallery here that when they were doing good, they were ostracised and they were vilified, and they were actually working in the public's interest. And I regret that very much. And we had eloquently told how some of these people lost their homes and lost their families and suffered an awful lot of mental hardship. Before I finish, I want to welcome my group here from Guinea-Willa up in the gallery. They're from Guinea-Willa and Rathmore, and we hope you enjoyed the doll here today. Just to continue, I know that these people wouldn't have raised the issues that they raised, and I won't go into the individual ones, only they knew in their heart and soul that they were doing good, and that's what to protect people that were being hurt in many different ways. And I too, like Mattie McGrath, certainly want an open and transparent review of what happened during COVID. And one of the things that hurt me to the core of my heart was where elderly people, their sons and daughters and their family members weren't left in to see them for 2 to 3 weeks before they got really bad. And that most hurting thing about it all was then when they were unconscious for the last few hours, when they didn't know anyone at all, everyone and anyone was let in then. Them were the kind of things, and we need to find out what was the purpose for that, because it certainly wasn't to aid or help the old person that was sick. because they didn't know what in the God was happening to them. Many of these people had their senses, and they were left there to die without anyone being left in to see them, and that's hurting me still to this day, and will until we have a transparent account of what happened or how that happened.
Look, it is true to say that the state, in the context of the people that the state is, the civil servants and the politicians, stand guilty of an awful injustice to the people in the public gallery and to those that are within the system that are experiencing the chilling effect of this debate, of what happened to the whistleblowers in the past, and there will not come forward. The state should own up to its moral obligations and should reach out to the likes of Maurice McCabe, who may not have been here today were it not for the strength of his own family and his wife, Lorraine. What has happened in the Gardaí since then? Have we seen dramatic reforms? Have we seen the Charlton Tribunal and its output? Have we seen that even implemented? What happened during the tribunal? My own name was besmirched by some unknown Deirdre G during the course of that to discredit me as a witness. John Barrett, the minister came in here to the Dáil and told us that he was being suspended, but nothing happened since. So John Barrett should be reinstated because he told the truth at the Public Accounts Committee. The moral obligation should be that he should be back in his place and he should be paid. Both the Charlton Tribunal and indeed the efforts being made by the state through their legal representatives is costing the state a fortune. And the ones being penalised are the ones that are making the disclosure based on truth, and the ones that are making money out of it are the lawyers paid by the government, by the taxpayers. I'd love to hear from Lorraine Morris, who was involved in the banking inquiry here, a complete whitewash, according to Jonathan Sugarman, and I support that. I'd like to hear what she has to say about the Ulster Bank investigation, about the fact that the Financial Times mentions the Ulster Bank, RBS and Lloyds, and they suggest a €50 billion redress scheme, and that part of what happened there is impacting on the SMEs in this country. But let's know what happened within this House in relation to the banking inquiry, and let's hear directly from Lorraine Morris. Jonathan Sugarman lost his job and nothing was learned from it. Sean O'Brien, a minister over the prisons at that time, said that he was outrageously dismissed and that he is satisfied that he was mistreated by this. This is a minister I'm quoting for. Mistreated by the state. The case was never brought to his attention. Julie Grace. Yes, I'll conclude now. Julie Grace should be recognised and it should be sorted without her having to go to Europe. Noel McGree lost his house. He was treated so badly that he still hasn't been compensated by the state. Should the minister not just step in and say, we have a moral obligation here to fix the wrong that was done to that man and his family?
Deputy,
and remember, behind every single one of those whistleblowers and the ones that are silently waiting.
Thank you, Deputy McGuinness.
There is a family. There is a mental health.
Thank you, Deputy.
And we
Minister Frank Feighan.
While all of that is put on them by the state
Minister Frank Feighan.
agents. Allo Mohin would be the same. And I could go on and mention
Deputy, please, could I call it?
But I wanted to say,
please, Deputy
McGuinness. I'm abusing my time.
Please,
I have 2.5 minutes. I want to say that if we only learned from the whistleblowers, we would save the state a fortune and we would hail them as heroes and not, as was described, disgusting. They're not disgusting. They are, in fact, heroes.
Thank you, Deputy McGuinness. Minister Frank Feighan.
There's a seat over here for you, John.
I'll fight me battles on this thing.
Minister Frank Feighan, 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to thank all the members for the informative and constructive debate on protective disclosures legislation this morning. I'd also like to welcome and thank the whistleblowers in the public gallery for their great work and service. I'd also like to thank the members of the Independent Technical Group for the proposals they have put forward for this debate. And having reviewed these proposals, I'd like to reiterate the issues regarding the flaws evident in some of these proposals highlighted by my colleague, Michael Healy-Rae. I am in full agreement with the need to adhere to the current timetable for the completion of a statutory review of the national legislation and EU Commission review of the EU Whistleblowers Directive. I'd also like to respond to some of the points raised, in particular the claim that comparative evidence from other jurisdictions demonstrate the need for additional measures such as reward schemes, punitive penalties for delay and mandatory publication of outcomes. This does not reflect Ireland's legal and policy context. While countries like the United States and Canada operate towards reward-based systems, these are linked to specific enforcement models such as securities regulations and tax recovery, which are not applicable under Irish or EU law. Ireland has fully implemented Directive EU 2019/1937, which sets out clear obligations for the timely handling of disclosures for confidentiality and for feedback within statutory guidelines. This includes acknowledgement within 7 days and follow-up within 3 months, extendable only in exceptional cases. Our framework also includes strong enforcement provisions. For example, under Section 14A of the Protective Disclosures Act, obstruction or bad faith conduct attracts criminal sanctions, including fines of up to €250,000 and imprisonment for up to 2 years. Introducing so-called reward mechanisms or punitive publication requirements would go beyond the directive, raise significant legal and ethical concerns and risk undermining the impartiality of the system. Ireland's approach prioritises transparency, accountability and fairness, consistent with EU standards, rather than adopting models designed for fundamentally different regulatory environments. I want the deputies to be clear that the Protective Proposals Disclosure Act 2014 is intended to protect workers from penalisation for speaking up about wrongdoing in the workplace. We can all agree that a person who truly and sincerely acts as a whistleblower should not be treated unfairly and should not lose their job or face adverse legal proceedings. This government remains committed to the fundamental aim in line with our EU colleagues and the relative EU directive. However, the last enhancement to this legislation is very recent, the Protective Disclosures Amendment Act 2022. This is not a long time ago, and even more recently, the establishment of the Office of the Protected Disclosures Commission took place and they commenced operations on the 1st of January 2023. The directive says that the European Commission must furnish a report to the European Parliament and to the Council on the impact of the national law that transposed the directive. The Commission has confirmed this report will be finalised sometime in 2026. The statutory review of the Act that is required by the same Act has to be complete in 2027, so that too will commence in 2028. The main point that I am making here is that there is already much work going on in this area on top of legislation which has already been updated recently. To clarify for the House, the Protective Disclosures Act 2014 protects workers from penalisation for speaking up about wrongdoing in the workplace, and persons who make protected disclosures, often referred to as whistleblowers, should not be treated unfairly or lose their job or face legal proceedings because they have made a protected disclosure. The Protective Disclosures Act 2014, as amended by the Protective Disclosures Amendment Act 2022, provides these statutory protection for workers. Protected disclosures can be made by workers in both the public and private sectors. This includes not only the ordinary employees of an organisation, but also any persons engaged under contract by the organisation, such as contractors, agency workers and paid trainees, as well as volunteers, board members, shareholders and job applicants. There are three main channels for making protected disclosures open to all workers. Internal disclosures to the employee. 85% of protected disclosures are made in this manner in the first instance. External disclosure to any person prescribed by the Minister of Public Expenditure, Infrastructure, PS Reform and Digitalisation are the Protected Disclosures Commissioners. Prescribed persons are usually regulatory bodies with powers to investigate and take enforcement action in relation to the wrongdoing in the particular sector, i.e. the health and safety sector, HICWA and data protection committees, and all prescribed bodies, and disclosure. Also disclosure by any other third party. This could include public disclosure to a journalist, to a member of the Oireachtas. The channel is subject to more stringent conditions to qualify protection. In general, this channel should only be used as a last resort if the other channels fail to operate as intended. In addition, workers in public bodies can make a protected disclosure to a relevant minister of the government. Under the Amendment Act, all protected disclosures made to ministers will be sent to the Protected Disclosure Commissioners for onward transmission to the most appropriate person to address the concerns raised. There are also special channels for the reporting of wrongdoing related to law enforcement, security, defence, international relations and intelligence. The Act prohibits penalisation or threat of penalisation of a worker for having made a protected disclosure. Penalisation includes unfair dismissal, unfair treatment such as suspension, demotion, loss of pay, change of working hours, reassignment, disciplinary action, etc., and coercion, intimidation and harassment. All employees have a duty of care to ensure their workers do not suffer penalisation. All workers have a duty of care to ensure the workers do not suffer penalisation. The Act provides for the criminal penalties for penalisation of reported persons, taking vexatious legal proceedings against a reporting person, and disclosing the identity of a reporting person. Executive grant support has been provided to Transparency International Ireland since 2016, and for the provision of a free Speak Up helpline and legal advice for persons considering to make a reported disclosure who have made protected disclosure. Funding for TII in 2025 amounts to $368,500, which is the same amount as was provided in 2024. The OPDC commenced operations on the 1st of January 2023. The Commissioner is designated to assist reporting persons wishing to make a disclosure to a prescribed person, either by directing them to be the most appropriate prescribed person or by receiving the disclosure referring it on to the most appropriate prescribed persons. With 100 prescribed persons, this will make it easier for workers the disclosure referring it on to the most appropriate prescribed persons. With 100 prescribed persons, this will make it easier for workers to get the reports to the right person. It also exists to support ministers in accessing and following up on protected disclosures they receive by referring them on to the most appropriate authority to deal with the information reported. In certain rare cases, where an appropriate person cannot be identified, the Office will follow up on the information received directly, and the Act for suitable powers to this effect. This ensures that there is always a prescribed person in place to report for any matter within the scope of the Act. I will bring back your concerns, views and helpful information and interventions back to the Minister and to Government. And again, I'd like to thank the Deputies for their attention for the day's discussion. I understand the proposal put forward by the Deputies. However, we must oppose this motion and support a counter-motion to continue to support the full implementation of the Protected Disclosures Act and the protection of whistleblowers generally.
Minister. Now we move to Deputy Richard O'Donoghue for completion of his motion.
Thank you, Conor.
Excuse me, Deputy. Continue, please.
Thank you, Ceann Corla. And to be quite clear, and before I start off, I'd like to thank John Campbell, Mark Nolan, Emma Corrigan, my colleagues here in Independent Ireland, and most of all the whistleblowers that gave us the details and information on this to make sure that we can bring PMB to government, which they are after delivering in 20 minutes of actually waffle of outside of what we were talking about. And I want to make this quite clear of what we are looking for. A review of the statutory protections afforded to civil servants. And this is where you have to listen now, deputies from that side of the House. A clear mechanism for professional accountability when officials act outside of their remit, not within their remit. So if they're doing the things right, give them 100% protection. If they're doing things wrong, they're breaking the law, and you should not give them protection. And if they're knowingly breaking the law, you should not protect them. The House, the end, and using public funds to defend ultra-virus actions, except where a genuine good faith error can be demonstrated. This House has a duty to ensure that state powers is exercised lawfully and transparently, and that when it is abused, responsibility does not fall with the taxpayer or an innocent family, but to those who misuse that power. We can go across all the civil servants, and there is civil servants doing brilliant work. They're doing good work, they're doing responsible work, and they're helping. We have a minority that have abused their power. But they've also were in positions that people that were in job descriptions under them, that they also abused the power on them to follow it on and keep this thing going. This is a responsibility of the persons that started this. So I'm not asking you to break the law. And a review of the submission of the EU directive, 50% of all submissions came from Ireland. And you're not listening. I've had people from that side of the House stand up here and make out up here and there saying, yes, you're right. I'll watch every one of you this evening how you vote. And I'm asking the government this evening to have an open vote in recognition of these whistleblowers here today. That's what I'm asking. I'm asking every one of you a vote of conscience. That's something that's in the remit of government. A vote of conscience. How many of you will sleep tonight if you vote under a whip system today on an amendment that you're bringing to this? It's wrong. And knowingly, you know it's wrong by protecting people in the civil service that are doing wrong outside of their remit. This is what we're asking to do. Every one of the colleagues here on the opposition benches spoke on this today. There was people had tears in their eyes from what they're telling you is what's happening. And you bring this to the table? 20 minutes of reading that literature. Jessica Sheedy, 2018, died in UHL hospital. And only for the whistleblowers, that same management would be in place today, and we would not be correcting the past. We have a new management there are trying their best to repair the damage that was done on a girl that died, on a person that should have never been allowed to operate in the first place because somebody withheld paperwork. That investigation has gone on since 2018, and now it's gone back to the UK to show them the full paperwork that was not disclosed. And you want to protect them under the whistleblowers and a law to say that they're being protected? They're not. I know her family. Anne and Jimmy. I was at their wedding. And ye are here putting in an amendment to protect them. That's wrong. We have people in the Garda service that saw wrongdoing. And what you do? You protect them. The people that have done wrongful doing. Instead of rewarding the people that are doing good and the people are trying to improve to make sure that they're lawful and right, you're there to protect them. Would any of you tell your children, keep going doing wrong and we'll protect you? Does none of you here would you? With your conscience. So I'm asking you to withdraw your amendment. I'm asking every deputy in this House on that side of government to withdraw it and do the right thing. I'm not asking to put civil servants at risk, the good ones. I'm asking you by law to bring the civil servants to justice and stop the rot. Millions of euros have been spent in cover-ups because they're afraid of the law. What's wrong with putting up your hands and listen, I've done wrong? Yes, there will be people who will make allegations and people will make submissions to say there's wrongdoing being done to them. That's within the laws, that if people wrongfully make allegations, that can be dealt with. And rightly so, and people that bring false allegations, that needs to be dealt with as well. But the laws are there for that. But there's no laws for what's happening here. None. So from Tulsa to our fire service, to our county councils, and I read out a case today that's going on since 2019 where the judge has made a statement on the case to say that there was no evidence from the local authority, but they used and abused the privilege of taxpayers' money and the privilege of government to bring this to court, knowingly that they hadn't the evidence and wanted to put a criminal conviction on somebody because someone else came up with some illusion that they wanted to bring it to court. That's wrong. If somebody does something wrong, they're brought to court, they're held accountable. That's Meath County Council. I have it in Limerick County Council. I have it in Cork. I have 6 or 7 county councils at the moment. We've shown the cases that came to court should never have went to court. And now there's High Court challenges, and I'm going to put it on the record here today that I'm now telling you that there is people within our civil services that are knowingly doing wrong. And when you see it go to the High Court and you see it being lost, you can sit there in shame. You have a chance now to do right. And your chance to do right is have a vote of conscience, an open vote by government. The Taoiseach walked in here a minute ago, and I believe he walked out again. But I will be asking, and I respect that, because there was 10 minutes to close the 4 leaders' questions. But he's here. But I'm asking you to look up there, think of your children and think of your families when you vote on this tonight, that you knowingly are protecting civil servants that are doing wrong. You need to protect the ones that are doing right and reward them, and you need to make sure that you bring those justice to law. The law of this country is the law. And you're not above the law, so I'm asking you now, please, hold these people accountable, and for these people that have went through torture,
Thank you, Deputy.
to bring it, reward them for their goodness and for bringing this and taking all the efforts within their families as well.
Thank you, Deputy O'Donoghue. Now I must put the question that the amendment be made. Is that agreed?
Not agreed.
Not agreed. Na teachtaí ar tar héamh na ceist aberdis tá, na teachtaí ina chuine aberdis ní. Healy-Rae go bhfuil an ceist riche. The question is carried. Vote all. Well, that division is deferred to the weekly division time this evening. Thank you, members.